This is chapter 28, I believe. I call it The House by the Side of the Road. It was a joy to be settling into our new home in Livonia, Michigan. Though 7 Mile Road was a main road, the house was 150 feet back on the property and it was centered on a circle drive. Therefore, we had no road noise to contend with. We felt like we were back in civilization. My old real estate office was just 3 miles away, and we were back in the company of most of our friends, except, of course, those we'd made in South Carolina. I did keep in touch with many of those through my letter writing and phone calls. Linda was happy to have her own kitchen to cook in and a bathroom to keep clean. It was the spring of 1980, and our 5 acres of property was thickly lined with trees on each side that gave us a sense of privacy. The McDonald's restaurant was just a half a mile east on 7 Mile Road at Farmington Road, and I soon developed the habit of walking there each morning for coffee, and after an hour or so of meditation on the scriptures, of course, I'd return home. We were in the fourth year of our new life in Christ, and though we had moved to different lodgings 6 times, I still did not have a track to run on, a regular course of ministry that I could give myself to. I still didn't understand that my life was not about ministry, but rather about lifestyle, living life on the Lord's terms. I remembered my friend Wayne in Columbia, South Carolina, telling me that I wasn't in the ministry. He says, I was the ministry. I didn't get it when he said that. Our home quickly became a haven of rest for pilgrims, weary travelers, local believers, mostly young, single people. We rarely ate meals without company at the table. Looking back, I remember some instances of God providing our daily needs, which I'll record, but for the most part, I cannot recall how He spread our table daily and provided such bounty for my family and so many others who found rest, safety, and strength in our home, and for my family. I was still not allowed to think about that working in the world at anything that was not my portion. This caused some problems for people. I remember a young woman coming to ask us if we knew what some were saying about me and not working. I told her not to tell us anything that was said, nor who was saying it. Those folks might come by soon for prayer, and I didn't want anything to hinder our ministry to them. The dining room table was also the classroom for our sons. Each day by 9 o'clock, they were up and out of bed, showered, dressed, fed breakfast, and cleaned their rooms, and were at the table for classes. Linda used a curriculum from Texas called PACES. There were booklets on each subject that allowed the student to move at his own pace and also required that he knew the material before he could continue to the next pace. Class would last until perhaps noon at the latest, and then the boys were free to do what they wished. I was often discouraged that I could not give them more to do with their free time. We did what we could in the form of field trips to various attractions in the area. Sometimes we just picked fruit from trees around our house and canned them or made jelly. 1 mile north on 8 Mile Road and about 2 miles west, there's a very large Lutheran-supported cemetery called Glen Eden. It was a wonderful park with at least a mile of clean blacktop roads, water, geese, trees, blooming plants, and of course acres and acres of grass. There are no headstones in Glen Eden, but rather simple grave markers. Each section of the cemetery is labeled as a garden of some name. The beauty and serenity of the place is stunning. I developed the custom of walking, driving there almost daily to spend a few hours walking, praying, lying on the grass, listening to God, and just enjoying His presence. I often felt caught up into heaven there. He spoke to me many times while secluded there with Him. We met a family who lived in Novi, Tim and Joni, who had 5 children at the time. They were conducting meetings in their home on Sunday mornings with a small group of young people. Tim and Joni are a little older than us and lived just as we did, were a great blessing to us and all who met them. He'd been a bricklayer most of his life, and both had been Christians in the missionary church since childhood. They answered the call of God to leave His work and be available for God to use in serving others. The meetings on Sunday morning were filled with incredible freedom and joy as we sang and preached and prayed. I first saw the love of God as displayed in a man, in Tim. When he found out we had a large yard to mow and no mower, he took me to his garage where he had several lawnmowers. 2 were tractors, so he offered to give me one. I took it. We woke one fall morning to find a consumer. Oh, this is a new paragraph. I'm sorry, I took that mower. One morning in the fall, we woke to find a consumer's power truck, the local natural gas supplier. They were in our driveway and several men digging a trench from the road to the house, 150 some feet. They said they were installing a gas line and they didn't know who ordered it, but they had a work order to do it. I never did know and still don't know who ordered it and who paid for it. Another morning, Craig, one of the young men we met at Tim and Joni's house, came by with an armload of boxes filled with brand new stereo equipment for our home. He set it up and filled the house with music. I told Linda I would like to have a piano in the house. We prayed and asked God for a piano. 2 days later, a lady we did not know called to tell us that someone, she just couldn't recall who, told her we wanted a piano. I know who it was. She had an old upright in excellent condition that we could have if we would come and get it. I arranged for a few friends, one with a pickup truck, to help, and we brought it home to the living room. I did not know how to play, but I did know a few chords, so I used them and expanded on that key. To this day, I can play almost anything on the keyboard or piano in B flat, and that matches my voice. That old piano was a great source of blessing to spend time worshiping God, alone and with others. Our oldest son learned to play it as well. Now, after all these years, I have become accustomed to the life God gave me to live, but at that time, the stress of living and giving by raw faith in a capitalistic world was very difficult. Often we would have bills due and some overdue. We kept a checking account at the bank where I had all my real estate accounts, but there was seldom any money available. We usually had very little gasoline in the tank of our car. Spending money was always at a premium. And looking back, I can see that God was working to change my thinking about money, needs, and faith. Our money usually came from Christians who'd been helped in some way by our lives. I believe that I was called by God into ministry, and I was often burdened by the sin of looking to men and to supply my needs. That's a sin. Men aren't my supply. At times I was even resentful of the church, by which I mean the believers who did not recognize my call, or I felt they were perhaps just obedient to God and not supplying my needs. I now know that God is jealous. He'll not allow me to look to men for my needs. I know that no matter what things look like, I've never fallen on hard times. He ordained my lifestyle many years ago, and I must live it in joy and faith. It was a race to run. It was full of pitfalls. Let me say now that we were never hungry, and we always had enough to share with whoever had come through our door. We only looked for money when we had none. Other than that, we simply lived and served in any way necessary. It was not unusual to find money in the mailbox from time to time. We also found money in my Bible, or perhaps laying on a table after company had left, or on the homemade countertop in a kitchen. I found it in my car. Sometimes I was just handed cash. More than once it happened that someone would have me drive them to the gas station to fill the gas tank of my car. At other times, people would bring bags of groceries to the house. I remember Linda praying for a color scheme for the house and the Lord providing it. Our cars and even toys came specifically as a result of our prayers. We had to pray about everything. I spent a lot of time in the cemetery each day, and early in the mornings, over a cup of coffee, I'd write letters to friends I'd met in South Carolina. Wayne received more letters than anyone, and my favorite opening was, "What's God teaching you?" That became like a password to us. Unknown to me, he kept all those letters, had them typed out, and sent them to me some years later. They were the diary of another pilgrim's progress. They reveal a deep hunger for God in my soul. A great reading. My Aunt Lee in Pinellas Park, Florida, of whom I've written in chapter 16, was now crippled from arthritis and living in a wheelchair. She had purchased a small rental house on the block next to her large home that she owned when she was healthy and financially independent. She was now on assistance and living out her days according to a life estate arrangement she had made with the purchaser of her house. She had the right to remain in the house without cost for the rest of her life. Linda and I had been in contact with Aunt Lee and told her we wanted to come for a week with our sons and help her around the house. She agreed. It was getting cool and we still had no way of heating the house. The heating system was an old fuel oil fired boiler that had breathed its last sometime before we moved into the house. I'd spoken with my friend George, the heating man from the church, and he estimated that he and his son could install a furnace and ductwork for about $600. I'm sure that was his cost. As we were finalizing our plans to leave for Florida, no money yet, we were invited to another wedding at the church where I was asked to pray for the couple as part of the ceremony. We agreed and attended the wedding. In the basement after the cemetery and after the ceremony, and where the food was flowing freely, I just felt drunk in the spirit. I was hardly aware of anything but the joy of the fellowship and the presence of God. I recall putting something in my pocket, but I just ignored it. Let me take a moment to talk about my suit. In the real estate business, I was pretty much required to wear dress clothes. Leisure suits had come into style, so I wore them. However, after I left the real estate business, my dress of choice was blue jeans and a t-shirt. And even now, after all these years, that is my most comfortable outfit. I had no suits or dress shirts or even ties. One morning at a breakfast of believing men, I met David, a young man who owned a big and tall men's clothing store. He was younger than me. We enjoyed the company of the morning, and he asked me to come to his store to visit him. We set a time and parted company. At the appointed time, I entered his store in the north area of Farmington Hills, and I enjoyed a cup of coffee with him. As we talked, he began to measure my neck, my chest, my arm length, my waist inseam and such. In a few moments, he had two beautiful three-piece suits, one black, one brown, several shirts, ties, underwear, socks, wrapped up and ready to take away. I was amazed, to say the least. He blessed me and sent me away. Well, it was one of those suits that I was wearing at the wedding. When we returned home from the wedding, I looked in my coat pocket to find several envelopes. Each one contained money, in total over $900. Linda and I rejoiced, thank God, and the next day I contracted with George to install the furnace and the ductwork, and we left for Florida. Aunt Lee was overjoyed to see us. She was no longer a drinker and had become a Christian. We repaired simple things like electrical outlets, and we painted the interior and exterior of her house. Linda helped her sort out the junk in her spare bedroom. Our week there was profitable and paved the way for many more trips there in the future. The winter of 1980 and 81 was snug and warm. We hosted a group of people that approached 40 in number every Friday night to watch videotapes of various teachers from Keith Green's Last Days Ministry in Lindale, Texas. I didn't know what was happening in the legal system and the bank about the house, but Linda and I had marched around the property claiming it for the Lord as our home. In spring of 1981, two of the young women in our lives, Barbie and Marcy, were not having an easy time of it at home. Barbie's parents were moving to New Jersey and wanted to take her along, which she did not want to do. Her parents balked at her moving in with us, but she was 18 and made her own decision. Her father, who was a Christian and who I had known at the first large church we attended, came to me, and we talked to Barbie and her situation. At the time, in my youth, I could not know what he was dealing with, but I promised him we would treat her as our own and keep her safe. Marcy's parents were Lutherans who did not understand the Spirit of God and were giving their 21-year-old daughter a bad time. They had met me and hated me for my relationship with Jesus. Well, both girls moved in with us and became the big sisters to our sons. That was a very difficult time for the boys. It felt like they had three mothers. Let me speak of our boys. They are wonderful men today. In their youth and living in a way that none of their friends experienced, they were often disappointed in circumstances. They knew that at one time I was a successful realtor, had plenty of cash flow, and had plans for their futures as well. Now, many things that other children took for granted were a luxury to them. They were consistently subjected to people with needs, some of them critical. They saw firsthand in many people the results of wrong choices in their lives, and they saw my wife and I working with them. I brought people home who were at times homeless, sometimes drunk, perhaps on drugs. They were the hungry and disenfranchised. Many of the young had not the blessing of parents who taught them or even cared for them. We had women who came to us for prayer and counsel for the hurt and unforgiveness they had in their heart for being abused by a father or a brother or a cousin or a neighbor. Our children were being homeschooled, so they were home all the time and quite often were part of the ministry. It was not easy for them. Often the people we helped were ungrateful and crass. I did all I could to show and bring them to the Spirit of God. Our boys were being taught to be tolerant and forgiving. Giving was the lifestyle for our family. My sons did not have a choice. That affected their thinking for later life. The girls were a joy to our home and grew as young women who were able to hear God speaking to them, and they too were learning what life is about and giving to others. The summer of 1981 would be a proving ground for that lifestyle for sure.